ခင်ဗျမင်္ဂလာပါgood afternoon Ms. Andy.
Mingalaba.
Now we have seen the US, UK, and Canada has targeted sanction against MOGE for the first time, no? But the sanctions remain limited to the certain financial service, right? So what you respond? What you take to that?
Well, I think it's a positive step in a few respects. Number one, the Canadian government's decision to sanction financial services, including insurance, that is supporting the importation of jet fuel into the hands of the junta is very significant. It's very, very important. I mean, if we can ground those planes by taking away the fuel that they need to attack villages, then we can save untold numbers of lives. So that's a very good thing. Secondly, the U.S., establishing sanctions on financial services benefiting Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, again, a very important step in the right direction. This is the largest single source of revenue for the junta, and the junta uses that revenue to purchase weapons, again, to attack the people of Myanmar. So it's very good. The third reason I think this is important is because there is indication of coordination. These actions were announced at the same time. There was obviously communication going on between U.S., UK, and Canada around these sanctions and this announcement. So that's a good step, a step in the right direction. Now, as far as what I think needs to happen, this kind of gives you an idea of what coordination could look like, but we need to have coordination across the board. So, for example, when Canada announces financial sanctions that impact the jet fuel that is getting into the hands of the junta, those kinds of sanctions should be applied across the board by everyone. MOGE, sanctions on MOGE should be applied across the board by everyone. And that coordination should be linked together. These governments, I'm recommending, should sit down, take a look at how is it and why is it that the junta is able to continue its assault on the people of Myanmar? And what can we as an international community do to most effectively stop it? And then let's work together as a coherent whole, all of us, to take those actions that will stop the junta from continuing these attacks. So we're getting closer to this. These are steps in the right direction, but we need stronger steps. We need broader sanctions. We need more countries enforcing more sanctions. We need it coordinated, and we need to have strong enforcement. I think that's the other key. Sanctions without enforcement are not sanctions. And there's a long way to go, I think, to the kind of enforcement that I think is necessary. So a step in the right direction, many more steps to go.
You have been advocating a lot about the international coordinator actions on the hunters and the embargo and weapons, money flow, and also including legitimacy, etc., etc. And you said a stronger action need to be taken by all of the international community for the further steps.
Well, I think first of all, in terms of legitimacy, there should be a clear policy by all countries who support human rights and the people of Myanmar, that they will not engage in any shape, form, or manner, in any entity, any conference, any engagement that includes the military junta, because the military junta will simply use that to project legitimacy when they are completely illegitimate. So I think doing a much better job at making sure that they're not allowed to get away with this will be a very important step. But as I mentioned before, I think the other key thing here is enforcement of sanctions, to make sure that loopholes that these entities that are linked to the junta exploit, that they can't exploit them. Let me give you an example. There was some sanctions. We released a report on weapons, the sources of weapons that are getting into the hands of the junta. And certain entities were sanctioned. Well, it turns out those entities, the businesses, simply created a new business, a shell company, called it by a different name, had the cousin or the sister-in-law of the original company take over, and then continue to do business as normal.
It's so a second version like around.
No, precisely. It's kind of that pea in the shell game. Well, so what's needed is that the enforcement of sanctions has to be holistic, not just on individual entities, but entire networks. And then the resources necessary to enforce these sanctions needs to be a greater priority of those governments that support human rights and the people of Myanmar. So if that could take place, if more investment in stronger sanctions, and then stopping these individuals from this pea in the shell game to avoid sanctions, that would be a very important step in the right direction. And then finally, as we mentioned earlier, coordination. I think the junta needs to understand that what it is doing is simply unsustainable. And whether it's the private sector or the public sector, their sources of revenue and weapons that enable them to continue this, they're going to be cut off. I hope sooner rather than later, but they're going to be cut off, and their days are numbered.
Thank you very much for your reaction, your comment, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.